San Quentin death row mystery, the man with the limp exposed. The blue footage case. The camera saw it first. A thin rectangle of moonlight lay across the concrete like a blade, and a man sat in the cut of it, elbows on knees, lips moving without sound. The timestamp in the corner of the frame jittered and rolled, a blue heartbeat in the dark. East Block after lights out is supposed to be nothing but hums and echoes. That night the lenses caught a whisper stitching through the bars. Officer Noah Reyes paused at the tier door and listened. He had worked San Quentin long enough to tell the difference between prayer and panic, between a story being rehearsed for a future parole board and a confession being coaxed out of the soul. This wasn't any of those. In cell 3 to 14, the new death row transfer, Jonah Pike, was talking to the wall like someone on the other side was answering back. The cell was a narrow rib cage of cinder block and iron, bathed in fluorescent blue that made everybody look like a ghost of themselves. Reyes rapped two knuckles against the bars. "Pike," he said, voice low. "You good?" Pike didn't flinch. He stared hard at his own hands like they were telling him a secret. His right thumb traced the edge of a crumpled scrap of paper. "It's under the bridge," he said almost pleasantly. "Has been for years. You think they don't know? They know everything. They keep it because it's easier to say nothing." Reyes felt the old prickle on the back of his neck, the one that means a story has a hook hidden inside it. "Put the paper down," he said, and unlocked the food slot. "Pass it out." Pike's eyes lifted at last. They were sunken and too bright, feverish but lucid. "You won't make it before he does," he murmured. Then his body went rigid. The scrap disappeared into his fist as he pitched sideways off the cot and hit the floor with a wet thud. Reyes called it in on instinct, keys clattering against his belt. Medical sprinted. A second officer slid the tier door. The unit filled with the antiseptic choreography of an emergency that comes too late. By the time the gurney rattled away, Pike's face had taken on that impossible stillness that turns a man into an artifact. Reyes stood in the doorway and felt the silence seal back over the place. He had seen overdoses, seizures, slow fade-outs. This wasn't any of those either. It felt like someone had yanked a cord you weren't supposed to see. He went back to the desk and rewound the feed. The cameras painted the night in bruised blues. The empty run of corridor, the angled view into Pike's cell, the grain crawling over every surface like cold static. At 2:11 the inmate sat up tight, started whispering. At 2:16 his right hand moved in small, fierce strokes, as if he were writing on his knee in the dark. At 2:17 the image jittered, just for a beat, the way a cheap television hiccups when a truck passes outside. At 2:18 he folded something into his palm and looked up, not at the lens but past it, toward the tier corner where there is nothing except a dead angle between two cameras. Reyes toggled to the other view. The corridor looked clear. Then, 30 seconds before Pike's collapse, a shadow skimmed the edge of frame near the far stairwell, a lanky silhouette crossing the spill of a single security light. Blurred, half swallowed by the grain, but wrong in a way that made his eyes tighten. The figure's gait hitched. Left leg dragging. A limp like a skipped word in a sentence. He printed the still to the thermal unit. The paper slid out with that faint waxy stink, the image already fading like a memory. He shoveled it into his pocket because he couldn't stand to leave it in the tray where anyone could toss it under a report with the phrase chain of custody issues stamped across the top. At dawn he wrote it the way reports require. Observed inmate experiencing medical emergency. Medical response within 2 minutes. No contraband recovered. Body transported per protocol. And then sat staring at the line where he should have added something about the scrap in Pike's hand. He could lie to himself and say he didn't mention it because of shock, because the shift was long and the night longer. The truth was smaller and sharper. He didn't trust the building to tell the truth back to him. He spent his lunch in the archive, a room that smelled like dust and floor cleaner, light slanting through wire mesh windows. Pike's file was a young bruise, recent transfer, appeals exhausted, a case that had moved on rails. There was a warehouse in Richmond, and before that there had been a couple nobody could agree how to talk about without turning them into symbols. The file was studiously neat, the way boxes get after someone with authority has insisted on neatness. Reyes hunted for the messy thing, a misplaced note, a handwriting that didn't match, a date that made no sense. The closest he found was a line in a witness statement from a man sleeping rough near the water the night of the warehouse attack. Saw somebody heading east along the shoreline, tall, moving like one leg had a nail in it. On his way out he passed the chaplain, who carried a small bin with the belongings that would be inventoried, scrubbed of the human. Reyes stopped him. Did Pike have any paper in his hand? The chaplain looked at him for a long, priestly second. If he did, he said, it belongs with evidence. Right? Reyes said and kept walking. He drove home the long way, tracing the cut of freeway that offers, for exactly 8 seconds, a postcard view of the Bay Bridge. The sky was the color of a burnt film frame. On the radio, an announcer counted out the day in cheerful bursts. He turned it off and listened to his tires and to the whisper that had nested in his head. You won't make it before he does. He should have slept. Instead, he ate standing up in the kitchen, moved through his apartment like a man dragging chains that only he could hear, and at 3 in the morning he went back out and pointed the car toward the water. The bridge at that hour was a pale necklace laid over the throat of the bay. The fog had folded in close, softening everything into shapes that suggested themselves, and then stepped back. Reyes parked near a strip of crumbling seawall and followed the edge under the pylons, where the city's noise thinned into a heartbeat and the smell of salt and rust rode up from the mud. He swung his flashlight low because the high beam turned the fog into a wall. He found footprints he couldn't trust. The bay will write and rewrite the same lie a dozen times on a single tide, but the mud near one concrete column had a gouge like a hand had torn at it and then changed its mind. He knelt and touched his fingers to the place, felt grit and silt and something that clicked faintly under his nail. Metal. He worked the edge of it up gingerly until a dull rectangle revealed itself, the size of a toolbox. He had the handle exposed and his pulse pounding against his palms when a separate light cracked the fog beyond him, a narrow beam sweeping the shoreline. Reyes killed his own light and went still. The new beam moved in patient strokes, up and down, left and right, as if the person holding it were painting the dark with a brush. It skipped over the pylon, over the waist-high tumble of rocks, over the water itself, and then came back and snagged on the glint of the lockbox handle like a fish to a hook. The beam lifted. It hung on Reyes's chest the way a thought hangs in the mouth before it is spoken. He could feel whoever held it measuring him. He could feel the pull in the person's gait when they started forward, the pause in the step that meant a hurt left dragging behind a strong right. He stood slowly, both hands open, not because he thought that made him safe but because it made him honest. I'm just a guy who should be sleeping, he said to the fog, tone even. Leave the box and walk away. The light flinched, then steadied. 30 yards. 20. Reyes could make out the outline now, tall, jacket zipped to the throat, shoulders hunched against the wet. The face was still swallowed. The angle of the head made the man look curious, not afraid. I won't make it before you do, Reyes said, and hated that the words sounded like a dare. The man laughed once, a soft broken thing. The beam slid off Reyes and swung out across the water like an arm making a grand, pointless gesture. When it came back, the figure had edged right toward the columns, the limp more pronounced on the uneven ground. Reyes lowered his center of gravity, CO training, years old and still as automatic as breathing, and took one step after him, not closing, just holding distance. The fog did something uncanny then. It thickened, and it carried a smell like old paper and glue, and somewhere in it a gull barked like a drunk laugh. The light ahead of Reyes jerked and vanished as if yanked into a pocket. He heard the small hard sound of a boot toe clipping metal, a muffled curse not meant to be heard, and then nothing but tide language and the far city pretending to sleep. He took out his phone to call it in, what exactly he couldn't have said, and found his notification bar already crowded. 3 missed calls from restricted. 1 new message from a number with no digits, just a blank line where numbers should go. He opened it. A single photograph filled the screen, lit in the color of hospital corridors and secrets. A Polaroid taped crooked to a paneled door. The image within the image showed the Bay Bridge, the lights gone to soft pearls by cheap film and fog. Along the white border, in handwriting that leaned like a body against wind, someone had written 2 words. You're next. Reyes tasted something metallic and swallowed it back. He looked down at the lockbox, its handle gritting quietly against the mud as the tide nudged it. He looked at the dark between the columns, where the man with the limp had dissolved like breath in winter. He dug his fingers under the lip of the box and lifted. It came free with a wet pop. It was heavier than he had expected, heavy in a way that promised either useless junk or something that would change the shape of the world inside his head. He carried it to the car, set it on the passenger seat like a sleeping thing, and sat with both hands on the steering wheel until the dashboard clock clicked over to a new minute and the bay exhaled. On the drive back he kept checking his rear view and saw the same thing each time. A ribbon of road floating in blue and the small, ridiculous square of a Polaroid pinned behind his eyes. The box ticked on the seat with each bump like a watch you were trying to ignore. By the time the first train groaned along the tracks beyond the prison, the horizon had turned the color of old bruises just before they fade. Reyes parked in the far corner of the lot and rested his forehead against the rim of the steering wheel. Sleep would not come. The day would arrive whether he wanted it or not. And somewhere between the bridge and the walls, a man with a limp walked away from the water as if he had all the time left in the world. The evidence locker. The first rule of working inside San Quentin is simple. Don't ask questions the building doesn't want answered. The second is harder. When you break the first, don't let anyone know. By the time Officer Noah Reyes carried the rusted lockbox across the staff lot, the dawn fog had peeled itself off the bay and draped over the prison like wet gauze. The walls stood in that bruised blue glow, fortress-like, as though daring the daylight to try and change anything. He parked in the far corner, away from the other cars, and stared at the box on his passenger seat. It sat there like a silent passenger, mud streaking its sides, salt water dripping onto the upholstery. The handle still ticked faintly with the sound of grit shifting. He should have walked it straight into evidence. That's what the policy said. Chain of custody, logged entry, supervisor sign-off, sealed under state authority. But Pike's whisper haunted him, "You won't make it before he does." If he carried this box into the building without knowing what was inside, he would never see it again. It would disappear into the black hole of restricted evidence. Like the Polaroid, like Pike's scrap of paper, like every other messy artifact that didn't fit the official version of events. He sat for 10 minutes, weighing his job against his gut. Then he reached across, dug his fingers under the lock's rusted lip, and pried. The hinge squealed like an animal caught in a trap. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in oil-stained cloth. He peeled it back carefully. A knife gleamed even under the dull light, not shining but glinting with the hard memory of use. The blade was long, surgical in its precision, with an edge too clean to have been dulled by time. Alongside it were photographs, warped by moisture, crime scene shots, printed on cheap stock, the kind reporters and cops passed between each other before the digital era buried everything in databases. Victims' faces blurred not by intent, but by damp and time. And then there was a Polaroid sharper than the rest, tucked at the very bottom. It showed the Bay Bridge again, same perspective as the one taped to Reyes's door in the message. Only this time, the white border carried a different message, scrawled in jagged ink, "Feeding the row." Reyes's stomach twisted. Pike had used that exact phrase the night he collapsed, though maybe he'd never heard it. Maybe it was planted. Maybe it was passed through whispers from cell to cell, until it landed in Pike's mouth like poison. He shoved the box back together and covered it with a prison blanket from his trunk. Whatever this was, he couldn't walk it through the front gate now. Not without explaining the photographs, not without giving the blade up to men who had no interest in asking whether Alvarez, Pike, or any other inmate had really been guilty. He locked his car and walked into East Block with his report-ready face on. The building smelled of sweat baked into concrete, disinfectant barely masking the iron tang of rust and time. The morning shift buzzed around him, trading jokes, cursing about overtime, swapping gossip about parole boards and gang politics. Reyes kept his head down, hands steady, as if he hadn't spent the night staring into fog while a limping stranger's flashlight hunted him. At briefing, the lieutenant droned about schedules, cell checks, a minor fight in North Block. Nothing about Pike's death except a clinical line, "Incident under review. Stand by for health report." It was already being sanitized, stripped of its teeth. When Reyes was dismissed, he slipped into the surveillance room under the pretense of double-checking camera logs. Banks of monitors hummed softly, painting the world in gray and blue. He replayed the corridor footage again. Pike whispering, the collapse, the shadow crossing near the stairwell. He zoomed the still frame until the pixels blurred into blocks of color. The limp was undeniable. He printed another copy and folded it into his pocket. The room's other officer, a grizzled veteran named Harkins, glanced over, smirked, and said, "Ghost hunting again?" Reyes forced a laugh. Something like that. But ghosts didn't walk with limps. That afternoon, he drove into the city to meet Emily Harris. She was already seated at a diner booth, hair pulled back, laptop open, coffee gone cold. She greeted him with eyes that held too much caffeine and not enough sleep. "You said you found something." Reyes slid the printout across the table, careful not to pull the knife photo or the Polaroid from his pocket. Surveillance still. The night Pike went down. She studied it. Her jaw tightened. The limp. "You've seen him before?" Her laptop flicked alive with tabs. Crime scenes. Newspaper archives. She clicked through until the screen showed side-by-side photos. Crime scene diagrams from San Jose, Oakland, Richmond. Victims stabbed with surgical precision. Witness sketches crude but consistent. A tall man, gaunt, one leg dragging. "They called him Keller in a few reports," she said. "Raymond Keller. A drifter. Parolee. Records vanish after 2000. But every case after that, same signature. And the suspects they did catch. She tapped the screen. Most ended up here. Death row. Buried under cases like Alvarez's. Reyes exhaled. Feeding the row. Her eyes snapped up. What? He told her about Pike's whisper, about the scrap of paper, about the words written on the Polaroid. He didn't mention the knife in his trunk, not yet. But the rest spilled out. The flashlight, the figure in the fog, the text message with the photograph taped to a door. Emily leaned back, running her hand through her hair. If Keller's alive, he's been operating for decades. And if the prison knew, they'd never admit it. Reyes's voice came out harder than he intended. She closed her laptop. We can't publish this without more. Anonymous notes don't hold in court and blurred footage won't sell to editors. We need something undeniable. Reyes thought of the knife wrapped in cloth, its edge still whispering murder. He thought of the photographs curling under time. He thought of the Polaroid taunting him with handwriting that carried the weight of 2 decades of blood. There's more, he admitted quietly. But if I hand it over, it disappears. I need a chain of custody I can trust. Emily studied him, searching his face for lies. You trust me? I don't know, he said honestly. That night, he sat in his apartment with the lockbox open again on his table. The photographs lay scattered like a broken deck of cards. He studied each one, trying to find a thread. One victim's ring hand severed. Another posed deliberately, eyes open, body aligned with neat precision. Not gang killings. Not random. These were trophies, staged like exhibits in a gallery only Keller understood. At the bottom of the pile was a photo that froze him cold. It wasn't a victim. It wasn't even a crime scene. It was the interior of San Quentin itself. East Block, cell 3 to 14. The same cell where Pike had whispered his last words. The photo was old, the wall paint lighter, the mattress less worn, but it was unmistakable. Someone had taken this shot decades ago inside the prison from an angle only a guard or staffer could have. Written across the back in the same jagged hand, still here. Reyes's pulse thundered. Whoever Keller was, he hadn't just hunted outside the walls. He had access inside. The next morning, Reyes brought the lockbox to Emily. She opened it with gloves, her breath sharp when she saw the knife. This is it, she whispered. This is what they can't bury. She photographed everything quickly, methodically, each click sounding like a countdown. Then, as she pulled the last Polaroid into the light, her phone buzzed. She glanced down and paled. It's a message, she said. No number. Just coordinates. Reyes leaned over. The screen showed numbers, a location pinned near Vallejo, less than 20 miles from San Quentin. Another body. Another site. Emily met his eyes. If we go, we might find proof. But if we don't? Reyes folded the knife back into the cloth, slid it into the lockbox and snapped it shut. He felt the weight of the choice grinding against him. We go, he said. Because if he's still feeding the row, he won't stop until someone stops him. They drove north as the day broke open, sky painted in dull gray strokes. The bay stretched wide beside them, the bridge looming like a spine. Emily traced the coordinates, eyes narrowing as the dot grew closer. And then ahead Reyes saw it, a line of police tape fluttering in the wind. Patrol cars. Floodlights. A knot of uniforms standing over something covered in white. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Reyes pulled over. He didn't need to get closer. The way the sheet was laid, the way the boots of the officers circled nervously, told him everything. Another victim. Another exact signature. And another shadow in the fog they would never officially name. Reyes gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The row had been fed again. And the man with the limp was still walking free. The reckoning inside San Quentin. The wail of sirens still echoed in Officer Noah Reyes's ears as he and Emily Harris pulled away from the Vallejo crime scene. The white sheet covering the body billowed in the coastal wind, and for a moment Reyes imagined it was trying to lift, to reveal the truth beneath. But truth at San Quentin had always been a body buried under layers of silence. Emily gripped her laptop bag like it was a life vest. This makes it undeniable, Noah. Same wounds, same precision, same. The limp, Reyes finished. His voice was low, almost reverent. He's still out there. And if he's still out there, then everything they told us about Pike, Alvarez, the rest of them. They were sacrificed, Emily said. Her words were sharp like glass snapping. The drive back was silent except for the hum of the tires. San Quentin's walls loomed ahead, lit by cold blue floodlights that turned the fog into a wall of ice. Reyes felt like he was driving into a tomb. Inside, the prison carried on as though nothing had happened. Guards joked at the gate. Radios crackled with reports of routine searches. Inmates shouted from tier to tier, trading gossip and threats. Life inside San Quentin had a rhythm that even death couldn't break. But Reyes could feel the weight of the lockbox in his trunk, heavier now than when he had first pulled it from the mud. He needed answers, but more than that, he needed to know who inside these walls was helping Keller, or at least keeping his shadow hidden. He started with the evidence locker. The room was buried 2 levels down, where fluorescent lights hummed with insect persistence. The clerk on duty was a heavy-set man with sleepy eyes and a crossword puzzle half-finished on the desk. Reyes slid his access badge and signed the log. "I need to review materials from the Pike case," he said. The clerk squinted. "Restricted. Warden's orders." Reyes leaned closer. "Then pull Alvarez's file. 2009. Shouldn't be restricted." With a grunt, the clerk shuffled off. Minutes later he returned with a thin box, far too thin for the size of the case. He set it down with a thud. Reyes opened it and felt his blood run cold. The box was practically empty. No witness statements. No autopsy photos. No investigative reports. Just a single transcript, brittle and yellowed, the ink fading. The record of Alvarez's sentencing hearing. "They stripped it," Reyes muttered. The clerk shrugged. "Told you it was restricted." Reyes slid the box back. "What else has been stripped?" The man raised an eyebrow. "You don't want to know." But Reyes already did. That night he met Emily at the diner again. He laid the empty file on the table. She flipped through it, lips tightening. "They're erasing the trail," she whispered. "Piece by piece. If we don't move now, there'll be nothing left." Reyes tapped the lockbox. "We still have this. And we still have Keller." Her eyes narrowed. "You think he's inside?" "I think he never left." The next week the prison was tense. Rumors swirled of a shakeup on death row. Inmates whispered about the ghost with the limp, who walked the tiers after lights out. Guards dismissed it as paranoia. But Reyes had seen enough to know better. One night on his patrol he caught movement on the surveillance feed. Cell 3 to 14, Pike's old cell. The camera showed nothing but shadows. Then at 2:17 a.m. the timestamp flickered and a figure crossed into frame. Tall, jacket zipped high, head down. Limping. Reyes froze. Whoever it was moved like they belonged there, slipping between the angles of the cameras as though they knew exactly where the blind spots were. The figure paused at the bars of Pike's cell, pressed a hand against the metal, and slipped a folded scrap of paper between the rusted bars. By the time Reyes sprinted down the corridor, the figure was gone. The paper lay on the floor of the cell like a dead leaf. He knelt, heart pounding, and picked it up. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, but unmistakable. "You're running out of time." The next morning Reyes carried the note to Emily. Her hands shook as she held it. "He's taunting you." "No," Reyes said. "He's warning me." Emily looked at him sharply. "Then what's next?" Reyes thought of Pike's whisper, of Alvarez's final words, of the lockbox filled with ghosts. And he thought of the figure in the fog, always one step ahead, always limping into the dark. "I have to bring it to light," he said. "All of it. Or it'll keep feeding the row forever." They decided to act fast. Emily prepped her article, layering it with photographs of the knife, the Polaroids, the blurred CCTV stills. Reyes gathered internal reports, quietly copied files, anything that hinted at a pattern of erased evidence. But the system was faster. 2 nights later, Reyes's apartment door rattled under a heavy knock. He opened it to find 2 men in plain suits, the kind whose authority came from silence. "Officer Reyes," the taller one said. "You're relieved of duty. Pending review." "For what?" Reyes demanded. "Compromising security protocols." Behind them, the hallway light flickered. For an instant, Reyes thought he saw a taller shadow limping down the stairwell, blending into the dark. The next morning, Emily called in a panic. "They shut me down. My editor pulled the story. Said the evidence was contaminated, chain of custody broken." "Noah, they know." Reyes gripped the phone, staring at the empty space where the lockbox had been. It was gone from his trunk, stolen while he slept. "They took it," he whispered. "Everything's gone." But the story didn't end there. A week later, another body was found near Vallejo. Same wounds. Same limp spotted fleeing the scene. This time though, someone had leaked the photos to the press. The headline screamed, "Copycat killer or death row wrongful convictions?" The state scrambled. Officials denied everything. San Quentin closed ranks. But the whispers grew louder, spreading beyond the walls, beyond the bay. People began asking questions the building didn't want answered. And Reyes? He walked the tiers one last time, feeling the silence settle over East Block. Inmates stared through the bars, some smirking, some afraid. On the wall of cell 3 to 14, scratched faintly into the paint, he saw new words, "Still here." He touched the cold metal bars and felt the truth sink in. The man with the limp had always been inside, not as an inmate, not as a guard, but as a shadow stitched into the fabric of the prison itself. San Quentin wasn't just a place where men awaited execution. It was a stage where secrets were fed into the darkness, one life at a time. And somewhere in the blue glow of the CCTV feeds, a figure still limped through the blind spots, reminding everyone who dared to look too closely. "You're next."